Okay, all right. Thanks, Jeanette.
We're recording.
Right, thanks. Well, good morning, everyone. And I guess it's probably still not too late to wish you a Happy New Year. Happy New Year. Welcome to the call, and thank you for giving us your time to participate in it. We may have already started this, but do we need to do any introductions, or are people sufficiently familiar with those that are on the call?
I'm familiar with everybody on the call, so I'm happy with that, and we did some brief ones early anyway.
Yeah, okay. Stephanie, how about you? Are you do you know everyone on this call?
I know a few people. Jeanette introduced me earlier. I probably don't know everyone, but that's okay. I don't mind.
Well, let's just do some very quick introductions. If we just sort of say
hello. Hi.
Hello.
Hello, it's Rose who's just joined you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Rose. Welcome.
Okay. Sorry I'm a bit late. I had a bit of trouble trying to connect to the session.
Don't worry. Welcome, as Jeanette said, Rose. We're just starting with some introductions. So as I'm talking, why don't I go first? We'll just quickly do some introductions, name, any involvement with the AC, and what I guess brings you to this call. So Declan Woods, Global Head of Standards and Accreditation. I've been involved in this from the outset. So who's next?
Lynn?
Wendy Oliver. Wendy Oliver.
Wendy,
I was an assessor on the first scheme prior to the new scheme coming out a few years ago. So been involved in quite so now I'm just thinking about whether to do individual assessment or to do the group assessment, so just trying to sort of decide between that.
Great.
Thanks, Wendy.
I'll go next then. It's Lynn here, Lynn Cooper. I'm on the UK Council as Vice Chair, but I used to do some work in standards and accreditation, and I've just been helping out with coach training sort of around the launch and assessment stuff. So that's why I'm here.
Thanks, Lynn. Who's next?
I can go next, maybe. I can go next. It's Stephanie Conway here. Hi, I'm on the AC Ireland Council, and I work as the Head of Operations. And I've recently gone through the training for the individual accreditation for coaches, and I have a strong interest in the whole area of accreditation. That's why I'm also here for the coach training accreditation.
Great, thanks, Steph. Rose, how about you?
Hi, I'm Rose Schofield. I'm from the University of Derby. I have actually, like Stephanie, I have a very strong interest in this idea of coach accreditation. We run a master's program here at the University of Derby, and it's how we actually can bring, I'm really interested in how we can bring the practical application of theory and bring the practice and the theory together at a masterly level. And I think I'm really excited about this whole opportunity of going for program accreditation, because I really hope that many more training providers, education establishments, anybody who's delivering it will actually get involved with it, because it's how do we actually improve the coaching profession and ensure that people are working to ethical standards.
Absolutely. Well, welcome, Rose. Is there anybody else that's on the call?
There's me, Jeanette Marshall, Head of Standards and Accreditation in the UK. I've been involved with the...
Who are you?
Exactly. Yeah, where am I? I've been involved with the AC for an awful long time, almost since its inception, and the purpose of my being here today is to encourage and persuade and negotiate and beg for very excited, willing volunteers to step up to the mark to become our coach training accreditation assessors. So I've really got high hopes with the group that are on the call. I'm very excited about that.
Great, thanks, Jeanette.
Thank you.
Well, you may have had a chance to see the outlined agenda, but essentially the agenda is this. We thought we'd sort of start with a bit of an overview and set the, what's the purpose of this call and the whole body of work in its sort of context. Then move into a bit of an overview of the scheme, and then really sort of dive into some of the details of the scheme. What we're particularly keen to do is to share with you the experience to date, including on the assessment and what we've learned from that. And I think essentially there are two aims to the call. One is to give you a greater depth of understanding of the coach training accreditation scheme, so that, as Jeanette was just saying, at the end of the call you can make a more informed choice about whether you still wish to continue supporting the AC in this, and we really hope you do. I think the other aim for this call is really to get you to a point where you're equipped with sufficient know-how that working in small teams that you'll be able to go ahead from here and actually assess some new applications that have come in. So I think that those are really the two aims. Is there, let me just press pause at that point. Is there anything else that you were hoping to get from this call?
I'm certainly waiting and expecting that I will learn from others, and I really value this opportunity to share learning with other people.
Great. Okay. Thanks, Rose. And that's probably a good point to say, yes, we're absolutely prepared to share what we've learned so far, and also to say we haven't necessarily got this 100% right. With something as complicated as a detailed design of a scheme, we're confident that it's sufficiently right to launch, and always, we're responsive to feedback, and there are things that we think, can be improved. So I think there's the learning that we can share from our experience to date on this. Equally, I think as you continue to get involved, we're looking to get some feedback from you about possible areas for improvement as well, and we can talk about that as we get into the detail. So I guess let's sort of put this in a broader context. So if I start and talk about the overview and the context, then I'll hand over to Jeanette and then Lynn to talk about some of the details, and then please pitch in with questions as we go along, so that you get what you're looking for from this call as well. So if we sort of set this in context, many of you will be aware that the AC, not long after its launch, had an original scheme called the Course Recognition Scheme, and essentially we found that had become outdated over time, and so we've gone through a period of redesign of that scheme. And so you're probably aware that in September last year we launched the current scheme, and I know Jeanette sent the documentations around for that. So that's the sort of history, and I guess over the last couple of years we've gone through quite an extensive consultation, design and redesign process, and I know some of you on this call, including others that will join later on in the call, were part of that. So thank you for that. And so hopefully what you're now saying is based on benchmarking with what was out there, both benchmarking in terms of other coach accreditation schemes, benchmarking against existing provision of programs, as well as consultation and development of the framework from the working party that consisted of providers of both short coach training programs and the sort of program that you're offering, Rose, as well. And I know you were very much part of that consultation and working party. So thank you. So that's the sort of backstory. I think it's fair to say that the take-up since we launched this in September has been phenomenal. So hooray! So we're obviously doing something right and offering something that meets the needs of the market. And I think we've had a significant number of applications, a significant number of inquiries with a view to people applying for programs of all different shapes and sizes and across the different levels. And I think that's both from the UK but also from a significant interest from a lot of markets beyond the domestic shores, which really sort of says something about the coaching market and how that's evolving. So I guess, a couple of you mentioned this. So Stephanie, I know you did, and I'm really, it's great to hear that you're a fan of accreditation and standards. And Rose, I know you mentioned this too. So this is a key scheme as part of the AC's armoury in raising standards of coaching practice out there in the market. We take the view that coaches continue as they start. And so if they start with a high-quality coach training, then and get into some good habits, then those habits will probably continue. So we see this as a key part of the overall aim of the AC to raise standards, which is great. I think as well from an internal perspective, I think the coach accreditation, training accreditation, is also a key part of us helping develop our membership base as well, and capturing market share, which again helps us to raise standards of coaching practice. So that's really the sort of context for the scheme. Let me just pause there to find out if there are any sort of questions before we sort of turn to some of the details.
I don't have a question as yet, but I can actually give you some positive feedback that happened just yesterday. I had launched the first day of a new Leader as Coach program that we're actually running. And what I usually do on any coaching-related program, I always give them a copy of the competence framework, the AC's competence framework. And these were teachers who are actually working in a lead practitioner coaching role within their secondary school. And they, you know, the newly qualified teachers, they have mentors, but they're now introducing coaching. And it didn't take 5 minutes, I promise you, of reviewing what was in there, the point about confidentiality, and one lady put her hand up and acknowledged to one of the assistant heads that was in the room and said, "Do you know what? I realize I have made a mistake. I actually breached confidentiality when I was coaching this woman, and I gave my feedback to her mentor."
Aww.
And I just thought that is the power of what we could be doing in our coach education. I don't know if anyone has any views about that. I was actually quite astounded by simply just giving them that, and automatically within 5 minutes of her seeing that document, I know that we are raising standards, and I also know that if we are going to be delivering programs in relation, and the expectation is that people will demonstrate those, you know, those indicators that the AC provides, we are going to have much better program.
I mean, that's really great to hear, Rose. I think it sounds as if that piece of awareness that the individual gained there really encouraged them to think about what they're doing and question that,
yeah,
and then change their practice. So great news, great news. I think that reminds me of a couple of things. One is that you'll be aware that we've introduced a framework for the coach training accreditation scheme, and there are 4 levels for that. But alongside that, what we also have introduced, and this goes to your point, Rose, is a leader as coach scheme as well. So what we were noticing in the market were that there were those that were interested in training to become coaches and to have their identity recognized as coaches. But equally, there were other individuals, including managers, that were using coaching skills as part of their repertoire of managing and leading, that really there wasn't a forum for giving them recognition of the skills that they'd acquired. And so I guess there's sort of 2 parts to the framework here. One is for those that identify as a coach, but also others, including managers, that use coaching skills as well. So we have a leader as coach means of recognizing programs that for those audiences. So that's a nice segue of their Rose. So
yeah, I can also. I'm sorry to interject here, but I can also give you feedback on that, because I brought it to the attention of this group of delegates that I was working with, and the fact that they can actually, we might be able to help them get that certification. It is fantastic, absolutely fantastic, and the reason being is because within the education sector, Ofsted, there's the Curie model, there's various agencies or professional bodies promoting implementation of coaching skills into teaching practice. as soon as I talked about, you can get we might be able to help you get a certificate as a coach, as leader, it was like the light bulbs go off. Fantastic.
Great. Well, that's really good to hear, Rose. So everybody likes good news stories, so including us.
I'm really excited for you, chaps. I really am.
Declan, may I ask a question here?
Please
It's
do.
Wendy. So am I right? I'm sorry, I've come to this quite fresh. So am I right in assuming that there's one part of accreditation which is accrediting the actual course, and then there's another part of the accreditation which is accrediting individuals who go through the course and then who meet certain criteria? Is that right?
Yes and no, Wendy. So, if that sounds like a politician's answer, it's not meant to. So, so what we're talking about primarily here is a new scheme to accredit coach training programs.
Yeah.
So, coach training programs designed for coaches and coach training programs designed for leaders or managers with coaching skills. So it's those things. What we're hoping is that coach training providers will look at the provision of their programs and think and recognise that in terms of the competencies that are taught, that they assess as part of the program, and so on and so forth, that there's potential or actual real overlap between those requirements and some of the requirements for individual coach accreditation as well. And so part of the aspiration here is to encourage and support coach training providers to help coaches with a leg up towards individual coach accreditation. So they're separate things, but they're sort of overlapping dimensions. And what we're hoping is that in effect there's a golden thread of an individual joining a program, becoming a member of the AC, going through the program, getting the knowledge and skills to coach, and then continuing to progress to coach accreditation. And so what we're trying to do is align those things to make that as straightforward as possible, and to encourage as much, to make sure there's as little extra work as possible for that while still keeping the standards. So that's what we're trying to do. Does that answer your question, Wendy?
I think so, yes. So once they've been through the program, then making it more easier for them to step onto the individual accreditation AC scheme.
Yes.
Yeah. Can I just say something? It's Lynn here. One of the things that we're noticing some of the switched-on coach training providers, particularly those with an AC bias, are already doing, and we've been trying to recruit somebody to go out there and help others to do, is to kind of shape their written assignments, for example, to kind of reflect the sort of things that people are going to do for individual accreditation, so that, writing a personal coaching approach, or, like those kind of things, looking at personal development plans, all the kind of things that lead in. The other thing that the AC are doing, which is not directly relevant, but it does feed into this quite nicely, is we now have a student membership offer. So anybody that is has an accredited, it will be an accredited course, but has been a recognised course with the AC, the training provider is offered a one-year deal where they can buy a very cheap membership, student affiliate membership for their students. So the idea is that they can market that as part of their course. So it's another selling point. The individual gets a year's experience of being with the AC, and that kind of starts them off. And after that, we hope they join individually. So it's another little, it's not directly relevant to this, but it kind of shows you where it's all beginning to come together.
Yeah, that's
slowly.
Can I ask a question on that? This affiliate membership. I'm not too clear on how that works. Is it something that we, as the provider, pay, or is it that the student pays for it at a fee of £20? Is that correct?
What you do is the provider makes the arrangement and pays the AC and provides all of the details in one bulk piece of information for us to do all the admin that needs to happen for people to get an individual membership.
And
you then have a choice as a training provider as to whether or not you fund that as part of your offer, or you recharge that on. So how you handle it thereon is your choice. Does that make sense, Rose?
Yeah, it does. Thank you. And what is the fee?
I can't remember off the top of my head, so we will get you some information sent after the call, Rose, just so that
Thank you.
can
I would really appreciate that. Thank you very much.
No problem. I'll arrange that.
Conscious of the time, let me just finish off something about the sort of overview and details of the scheme, and then let me hand over to Jeanette. So, as I say, if we just focus for now on the coach training accreditation scheme, so there are 4 levels, and what I'm looking at now is the overview document that Jeanette sent around. So
right, and I'm going to show that on my screen now, so you all ought to be able to see that. Will that help?
I am actually calling in by telephone, so I am not. I don't know. I can't see it.
Rose, this will show.
I have got the documents in front of me. Don't worry.
Perfect.
I'm doing the same, Rose. That'll be fine.
Okay. Okay.
I think, in effect, so the idea of this document is to give an at-a-glance view of the requirements, both for a coach training provider, but also for potentially a participant on a program as well. And so, the way in which we've designed this, you can see that we've tried to include a prose description of the training courses, really to both to paint a picture of the level at which the program is situated, but also to think about this from an individual participant perspective and the sort of maturity and degree of sophistication of their coaching practice. So, in other words, as a provider, you should be able to use those descriptions to think about what level your program is operating at, but equally you might use that to educate potential applicants for the program about, is this program the right one for them? And that's probably quite a useful sort of starting point. That you can see how the framework evolves alongside coaches' practice as that develops and improves over time as well. So that's one thing I wanted to draw out in the overview. The other is there are some base or eligibility criteria in there that we have across a number of different areas: face-to-face, class-based training, self-study hours, coaching practice, and then a total number of hours for the program. And so, and that's one of the areas that we're continuing to look at. So not surprisingly, we're getting quite a lot of inquiries about, well, my program doesn't quite fit, can I still apply? And we're looking at where the flexibility might lie in that, whilst at the same time trying to maintain the integrity of the scheme and recognise the work that's gone into to creating it. I think there's always the risk that we constantly reinvent the wheel to fit individual circumstances, and we need to avoid that. So I guess it's managing the tension between being responsive and flexible and maintaining the rigour and standards of the scheme at the same time. So that's essentially that scheme. I guess, again, let me pause and ask if there are any questions.
If no one else has got a question, I feel like I'm interjecting all the time. Does anyone else have a question before I say something?
No, that's clear to me.
Okay. Okay. Certainly, I've had experience of filling in these documents quite recently. And Declan, I say this because you've just raised the point about, where do we position ourselves? Because on a master's higher education program like ourselves, we are actually working between the HE, the higher education benchmark statements and quality standards, trying to work with what you were doing. And so there's quite a lot of complex stuff going on for me and trying to fit it all in. And we focus more on the coach education, a lot of the theory, which I personally feel that a lot of the shorter training courses miss out on. And the kind of participants, I will use the term students because I work in higher education, the kind of students that we seem to attract are those that have probably got a lot of relevant coaching experience. They've been in that role. They have probably done umpteen coaching courses as their own CPD along the way. We get people in a variety of roles. Many are actually working inside an organization, and they're probably doing coaching or mentoring as part of their job role. We get those self-employed people, the consultants, the people who are looking to make a career move, and people will be doing more coaching than others.
Mm-hmm.
So we have got this real complex situation because of the needs of our entrants, our students. So I'm now really challenged because I want to be responsible towards my students. I want to be responsible towards the AC in helping you raise the quality standards for coaching. But I've also got to be flexible, and I'm hoping the AC can be flexible because we know academically we've got a very masterly program. We get fantastic feedback from our students. Our students tell us about gaps in what they see in their training and their previous training, and I'm thinking I'm now trying to put myself into one of these boxes whether I go for these levels here, and I'm thinking but our students, depending on their role and their need, they will deliver evidence of a variety of coaching hours practice.
Sure. So let me respond to this in a couple of ways, Rose. So thank you for raising it. Is the first thing. I think in terms of standards and visibility of the standards, from an assessment point of view, the part of the scheme that gives us the real visibility of that is the class-based training hours. So that puts an emphasis on that part. Whereas, of course, we recognise that a lot of the self-study hours and the individual coaches' practice offline of the programme, there's a greater potential for more variability there. So we recognise the difference between those two. I think the piece of work that we're looking at the moment is accepting the emphasis on what happens during the input parts of the program, the classroom-based parts of the program. We're looking at what might be some of the equivalences, or where do you trade up, where do you trade down for these things in terms of how those things might net off against each other, so that we can build some more flexibility into that. So that's something that we're looking at the moment. Yeah, and I think what would be good is to hear your views on that collectively after you've been involved in some assessments. Yeah. Okay. I'm conscious of the time and the aims of the call. So what I'm going to propose at this time is that I hand over to Jeanette to move into some of the more details, particularly around the sort of assessing and what we've learned so far. So, Jeanette, over to you.
Well, thank you all, and thanks for your enthusiasm and input. That's much appreciated. So again, because I'm conscious of time, what I'll do is I'll just take you through a brief run-through of how you prepare yourself as an assessor and some of the key things that you need to do. So one of the first things to do is to make sure that you have a look at the Coach Training Accreditation Scheme overview as you get an assessment, to familiarise yourself with which level you're actually going to be assessing, and particularly run through the descriptors of the training course. That's really useful just to get you in the right mindset. A couple of kind of housekeeping things. When you are given an accreditation to assess, we ask you whether you've got any prior knowledge of the organisation or the individual that's submitting the application, and we would ask that you kind of maintain confidentiality about anything that you pick up, as a matter of course. What we also do is give you a suggested time for return of that particular assessment, and going forward, as it's a new scheme, what I would like to propose is that I put you into pairs, excuse me, and you actually work together on applications while you build your confidence and your level of expertise and skill in this particular area, and that will be something that we'll review as we go on. So the very first thing is to have a look at the overview scheme and make sure that you understand which of the levels you're actually assessing. The second thing to do is to look at the application form. Okay, and those of you that have had sight of this already, it's in two parts. So we have, so of course I've picked on part B. If I pick on part A to start with. So part A is just information about the organisation. So, you know, the basic things that we would need to know from an applicant when they're completing a form. So that's the first of two parts, and there are some key statements there that we ask the organisation to sign off on, and obviously there are terms and conditions of how the scheme is actually run. So the first part is very much about information about the actual organisation, and the second part is quite a lengthy document, and it goes through piece by piece each of the elements that we'll be looking to assess. So if we look back at the overview form, it's how we capture that information on each of those areas. So again, the organisation is asked to tell us which coaching competencies they use, so for which body, and to work through completing the form, how their course actually matches against the competencies that they're saying that they use. So that's quite a lengthy thing, and this is the document that you'll be working from in order to assess an application. So there's a step that happens before you're given an application, and I'll share with you the document that we use for that. It's a two-stage process when we're assessing on the coach training, as opposed to a three-stage process on the individual coach accreditation. So it's a two-stage process. So first of all, when the document is received with all the accompanying documentation that we require, it goes through an eligibility check. So before you are presented with an assessment to do, you'll find that certain key things have already been checked. So what that means is you can focus on the content of the course as opposed to wondering whether or not their hours agree with the criteria that we've got for that particular level. So you can see here there are a separate section. So the eligibility check will check that they are still a current member, for example. What we're doing as a result of feedback that we've already gotten from working through the first few assessments, as with everything, we're undergoing a continuous evaluation and improvement process on all the documentation. So chances are by the time you get your first assessment, this document itself will have been tweaked slightly to incorporate the feedback we've already got. And I would ask those of you that want to go forward with this as assessors to be in communication with us about things that can be tweaked and can be amended and can be refined as we go through. And for that very reason, we haven't set in stone the internal processes around that. It's very much, you know, we want to kind of use your expertise as you build it to work out what's going to be best for all of us going forward, to make it robust but also to make it manageable, not just for us as assessors but also for the applicants themselves. So this is your Bible, if you like. So this is where you will enter your thoughts and findings when you go through the assessment. I could spend a lot of time going through this. My sense is you would probably benefit from having, once you've decided to go ahead, from having a real life application and to work through it, and I can give you some supporting training around that, which will be in the form of a YouTube video where I can take you through step by step what you need to do. But in essence, this particular document will enable you to identify whether it's a pass, a resubmission or an outright fail at the level at which they've applied. So lots of information in there. Some of you may be thinking, how on earth am I going to get this done? How long is it going to take me? So from my own experience, and we are learning very much at the highest level, so the advanced diploma, we're looking at probably 2 hours at the moment, and I suspect that that time will be reduced as we go forward and as we get more comfortable and more experienced in actually working through these things. So that's also something to consider when you're offering to volunteer. You know, how much time will these things take, and how much time will you be able to put aside to work on it to fulfill your number of assessments. So I'm conscious that's a real whistle stop through this. Has anybody got any thoughts or questions or concerns at this point?
Jeanette, it's Wendy. Just timing. How long would you say this takes compared with a master individual application?
Oh God, it's
If at the highest level of training.
half the time. Easily half the time. I reckon 2 hours at the highest level on the coach training accreditation, and that's at the moment when you know, with all things, Wendy, it's harder the first or the second time around, isn't it? You know, once you've got some experience under your belt, it's quicker. So I would say an awful lot quicker than the coach accreditation, the individual coach accreditation.
Okay.
And less time for the shorter programs, so the AACT and the AC CTA levels. So you know, yeah, they can be quite quick to do, which is good.
So
it's definitely here. And Jeanette, I'm also planning to have like a, you know, is there a minimum number of applications that we have to go through if we decide to go with this?
oh, absolutely. We want at least 100 in the first year, Stephanie. Each, yeah.
No problem.
Yeah, that's something. I don't know if Lynn, if you have any if you want to come in at this point, or
Yeah, I mean, we're trying to look at what's sensible, but what we've learned with coach accreditation and the sort of new systems that Jeanette's putting into place, certainly in the UK, is that when people do a significant number, so you know, ideally at least a dozen a year and maybe even more of these things, you actually get, we get a much better quality assessment. You find ways of doing it quickly and efficiently and effectively as you build expertise. You know, we all know that if you do something occasionally, you kind of have to really, you know, get brain back in gear and work out how to do it all again. So we haven't set those numbers yet, but I think, you know, it's going to be sort of somewhere between 8 and 12 as a minimum over a 12-month period, and ideally more is my first
That makes
thought.
sense. Yeah, thank you, Lynn. That makes sense.
so Jeremy agrees. That's good. so
Yeah, he does, certainly.
so any other questions or thoughts around what we've covered so far?
No, just to say, I haven't read through everything on this yet, but it looks like, once again, like you've done some fantastic work, the people who've been working on this, so just to say that, really.
Oh, that's really sweet. Thanks, Wendy. Okay.
I just want to say I'm really excited for you.
I love your excitement, Rose. That's great. You're making my day.
Well, no, because it's a passion of mine to raise the standard, and then, you know, like Stephanie, and I'm just thinking, you know, this is fantastic. And yes, you know, I'm going through it and I'm thinking, well, you know, maybe things could be slightly different. And as you say, we are learning through this. But I'm really excited for you because I think you're doing fantastic work.
That's brilliant, and that kind of brings me to something else in terms of, you know, the kind of individual style that we're looking for. It's for people that can be kind of open-minded and inclusive, and certainly the passion that I'm hearing is great. That can only help us make this scheme better as we continue to refine it and review it as we go forward. Who would like to cover off the kind of learnings to date? Or do you want me to take that bit?
Why don't you carry on, Jeanette,
Okay.
and I'm sure Lynn and I can jump in
Okay.
and support.
Right, so the learnings that we've had to date is, as with all things, the theory of something is very different to doing the practical element of it. Hence, we've already made some adjustments in the documentation, certainly the internal stuff that we've done. I think it's about looking, because we could approach this two ways. We could do it very much as a tick box exercise, as in, you know, has the applicant done 80 hours? In this case, I've picked a diploma document to look at. Have they done 80? Have they got 80 hours in the classroom? Have they got 70 self-study? Have they got 40 coaching practice? We could look at it at that level, and it might meet the eligibility requirements, and that could be great. But what we've chosen to do is have a much more in-depth look to have a feel about what's going on. Does it really map to the competency that they've said that they're benchmarking against? You know, what's the quality of the self-study that the individuals on the course, on the programme, have been asked to do? So looking at it much better, and certainly my sense is, as we go forward, in the same way as it's happened with individual coach accreditation, is as people perhaps delivering coach training, we will become much more aware and we will gain a lot more through having gone through this process and seeing what other, not just what other organisations are doing, but the different approaches there, and there is a kind of voice in the back of your head thinking, oh, I could do that, or I could do something differently, or, you know, that's a great idea. And equally, you know, aren't I glad that we're not doing that, because, you know, some of the applications we might get through might not meet the criteria and meet the mark. So certainly we're learning from that going through, and Declan's already covered, you know, we're looking at ways in which we can be more flexible around some of the hours, certainly. And it's also, you know, one of those things when I think when we pick up an application for any assessment, it's very easy to have a sense and some sort of intuition around whether it's good, bad or indifferent. What we're really keen to do in the AC is to have evidence to support that. So I'm sure, you know, we've all seen applications in different areas where it's the equivalent of a, you know, a coffee stain and a cigarette burn on it, and some of the applications we get through do feel like that, hence one of the reasons why we put it into 2 stages. So someone does the eligibility, so we don't kind of prejudge anything if there's a lot of toing and froing with the organisation because they can't actually complete the application form properly. So we've separated that out, and so what we need you as assessors to do is to come to this very clean and open-minded and look at the evidence that's presented, and equally give feedback around the evidence, not how we feel it ought to be, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. And if I could just butt in there, Jeanette, one of the challenges of a new scheme like this, and we've had the same challenge when we introduced the tiered coach accreditation scheme, is to look for the qualitative difference. So in terms of an advanced diploma will cover all of the coaching competencies, as will an introductory course. But it's how, you know, what's the depth of learning, what's the quality of the assignments and so on, you know, the calibre of practice and the feedback and supervision and all of those things. And because this is new, we haven't yet got all of the criteria to say, yes, you know, at a diploma level or an advanced diploma level, we would expect it to be like this, and I can quite measure that. So some of that is still at the moment a bit intuitive, and we need to nail that, and we need to do more assessments and work with a good assessment team to kind of get some of those differentiators. Because it's not just a tick box exercise, you know, we do need to see a distinct difference in quality of content.
On that point, I did wonder about this myself when I was completing the form, would it be useful for me to provide an example of how feedback is given on assessed work, and also an example of an assignment, just to show the depth to which we went to?
Well, I think that's a really, really interesting idea, Rose, and these are the sorts of things that we're beginning to uncover as we start to assess. So, you know, that's something we may want. And what I'd like, you know, if you go forward as an assessor, which we're really hoping you will.
I would like to. I'm committing myself. I would like to.
Excellent. We've got
brilliant.
Recording.
Yes.
So what you will then be able to see is it from both sides. So what we also sometimes have is applicants who want to show us so much about what they do that we are drowning in information, and that 2 hours for an assessment becomes 2 days because we've got recordings to listen to, we've got things to read and whatever. So it's finding those additional pieces, which might be just the ones that you've said, that give us the extra edge in terms of how we assess, you know, the bits that we're looking for. And we haven't got all those bits of the jigsaw quite right yet, and that's where we really would be looking for help from assessors to say, do you know, it'd be really useful if I could see an example of an assignment here, and an example of a bit of a way how people give feedback. And there's two ways of, two things or two routes for that. One is that we specify that as part of the application, because we will, you know, amend and tweak the application approach when we know that we've got gaps, we're not getting enough information. There are other times when we might go back to an individual applicant where for some reason the way the application has been put together, the content and information we've been given, is leaving us with a question mark. And we might go back specifically and say, do you know, it would be really useful if we could see an example assignment. You know, that would give us the bit that we're just not sure about. So, so all of those things are part of the sort of emergence now as we get into this and get into the groove, and we find out where the little bits are that we can tweak to make all the difference, to make both the application better and particularly our ability to assess it better. So, you know, that's exactly the kind of thinking, Rose, that we're looking for.
So just to build on what Jeanette and you have just said there, Lynn, I think the on some occasions there is a bit of a mismatch between an application meeting the basic eligibility criteria and the level of sophistication of the program and the level against the framework that's designed for. And we're continuing to look at that, as Lynn said. I think the important thing from an assessment point of view is not to disadvantage the applicant at this stage because of either the way we've expressed the requirements in the guidance or form, or perhaps the way in which we've captured and assessed that. So I think that's a related point about not disadvantaging the applicant. And where we find that to be the case, we award a pass with some, not a conditional pass, but some very strong recommendations of areas that we would encourage the applicant to look at, so that by the time they come to resubmit their for reaccreditation in the future, then ideally they'll have addressed those points. So I think that's a way that we found of responding to the sort of tensions there. So I just wanted to add that from an assessment perspective.
Brilliant, thank you. And I think you can already take from the communication this morning that this is very much a team effort on every level, and we're looking to continue to work together with our assessors as we go forward, and also to work with the organisations that want to apply to make sure it does meet their needs, and equally that we kind of set the standard and raise the bar.
And I guess just adding to that, Jeanette, and I guess this goes partly back to your question, Wendy. We've aligned the requirements for coach training broadly to the requirements for individual coach accreditation. And certainly that's the case on the lower levels in the framework. And what we were trying to avoid at the higher levels was this idea that I can go on a training course and that immediately makes me a master coach, because we recognise there are a whole number of other things that contribute to that. So what we're trying to avoid is I've done an X-level program and that gives me the training to be a master coach, therefore I must be a master coach in individual coach accreditation. So I think there's broad alignment there, progressive and enabling in that way. And there's still a gap deliberately in terms of the level of individual coach accreditation, particularly at the master coach level, where the training finishes.
But that brings me back to something that you said very early on, when you actually said about the progression route for somebody working towards the individual coach accreditation at the highest level. And I think, for me, that is really important. I fully appreciate that to be a master coach, you need to have, X amount of hours to be there. And so what I see as raising the standard is also about the coach education. So it's something about the quality of the program. It's almost like somebody could start on the leader as coach, and then move on to, I've really designed a framework here which I might be able to share with you. I can ask permission, but leaders coach, then they can move on to our program, accredited program, and then as a result of that, then they can apply for the individual accreditation if they want to. They can then work towards the highest level of individual accreditation. For me, that's a given. Just one example.
It seems like what you're putting in place here is something that it starts off with helping people to get the skills to be a coach, and to ensure that, as you said, Declan, that we're starting people off on the journey with good, rigorous training, and then you're supporting them through the individual accreditation scheme throughout their whole career.
Yeah,
up to
absolutely.
master.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
I don't have a problem with the fact that, you know, if we do get the, you know, the highest level of program accreditation, personally I don't have a problem with the fact that they cannot call themselves a master coach unless they have the specified number of practice hours.
Great. And I think I mean, great to hear that from you, Rose. I guess the sort of feedback we were getting as part of the consultation was that there were there's a growing number of master's degree programs, and criticism that, you know, those are very sophisticated programs, but the amount of coaching practice undertaken is very light, and there was a mismatch between the sophistication of the program and the sophistication of the individual's coaching practice. Yeah, and so we were trying to, and hence the broad alignment but slight uncoupling between the two things. So,
I like that.
you know, any more learnings to date from you, Jeanette? Let me pass back over to you.
I think that the main ones have been, you know, around certainly about how the applicants complete the documentation. We've had already many variances on that, so that's always good in terms of feeding back into the applicant guidance notes, you know, the things we might change up. We've already covered the fact that the hours, we're kind of looking at how we might be more flexible on that. And really, you know, as with anything, there's a broad range of the level of quality around how different organisations choose to complete this sort of documentation, and I guess that's always the case. And I think, you know, as an assessor, it's about, okay, so you know, we might have people that just kind of get under the wire. We might have ones that are absolutely fantastic, and it's how we kind of balance that and agree that there's standardisation across the board. So if Assessor Y is assessing something, then Assessor Z will also come to the same conclusion on the same application. So again, I think that's really important when you're starting out on this, to work with someone else so that you can kind of discuss some of these things. And certainly from personal experience, that's where I get the most learning, is in some of those discussions. So yeah, so I don't know if there's anything else we've found so far, is there?
I think
I'm okay.
Yeah. I think what we're also saying is some examples of some really good practice, and they really sort of stand out. And I think part of the feedback that we give to applicants is to acknowledge that and to encourage that innovation. So I think that's part of the excitement of assessing for me. That it's like, oh, that's really different. God, that's good, and it just brings into awareness other people's practice, which is both a privilege and really interesting to see.
So I'm
conscious of the time. I mean, we started off with a call by saying that the aspiration here was to familiarise you with the scheme at a greater level of detail, so that you could make a more informed choice about whether you continue with this, and also to try and get you to a point where you're able to work in pairs on live applications. So I guess in the closing minutes of the call, is there anything else that would be helpful at this point to achieving those aims? And then let's just briefly talk about next steps.
I don't think so. I think for me, I need to go away and read the documents now, and so I've really fully had a look at those.
I'm
okay, thanks.
I'm okay.
And Stephanie, are you okay?
Yes, I am. Yeah, sorry, I probably got more hurt than me.
Okay, brilliant.
So I think in terms of next steps, I think clearly we'd be delighted if you signal to us that you'd want to continue doing this. We really hope that you do. We think not only is it valuable to the AC, we think individually you get a lot from it as well. So I think next steps would be if you are interested in continuing this, if you could express that to Jeanette, and then we can then put a plan together from there in terms of the current applications and the best match with those that want to assess them. Yeah. Jeanette, anything else, and Lynn, anything else from you to add just before we round off the call?
From me, I just really hope that each of you want to take this forward, because I'm really excited. I like the possibility that it opens up in working with you on this particular scheme.
And Lynn?
There's nothing for me to add apart from, encouraging you all to come and help and have fun. I think it could be a really good group.
Yeah. Great. Well, it's just coming up for 10 o'clock. We said we'd run for an hour. Let's finish slightly ahead of time. So thank you again on behalf of the AC for your interest and your contribution so far. Have a great Friday, a great weekend, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very
All
much,
right, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thanks
Thank you.
very much.
And thanks so much for inviting me.
You're welcome, Ray.
Thank you.
You're welcome.